La roast beef, faut se dépêcher un peu, hein.
Are you recording?
You're gonna wait 7. Move. You're still in my light. Move. My loyal subjects, I welcome you here today to this most wondrous event in which my presentation that I have made for you on these wondrous times, all by myself, which I have made, I may add, of my own accord, for you the people, because I am a kind-hearted queen who does things only for her people. And so without further ado, my presentation to you shall be presented. What are you waiting for, servant? Go and read it.
It's not my presentation.
I don't care. Go read it.
I didn't think.
I don't care.
No, Manly, stop.
Did
I'm
I
recording.
read?
It's okay.
I know, I'm recording.
Romantic Period by Isabella's Group. France. Well, there was a thing happening in France at the Romantic Period. It changed a lot of people. Music was invented of it as well.
Servant, go fetch me my water pitcher. I'm thirsty.
But
I don't care. Go and get it. And don't take so long. You have a presentation to present. The people are waiting. Back to it now.
Lots of people like this thing happening, and a lot of people like the music from it. Music was romantic in the Romantic Period, and it was nice to listen to. And the people
Servant, I'm hungry. Fetch me some food.
and presented.
I have not declared this National Complaint Day, okay? You don't get to complain. You're going to go get me my food now. Hurry up. It's impossible to find good help these days.
Isabella, that really fit to the roast beef.
Let's get back to my presentation.
And there were lots of famous composers in the period too, but not everyone liked it, but most people did.
I disagree with
I have said it, and now we do not live in an oppressive government anymore. Now we will show you what is possible when the queen has been slain. Dead. She's dead. No longer there. Now we will show you what can really happen. Everybody can have bread.
Remember, you can come get it. You bake it? Here, send it on. You bake it? You can take bread.
You should throw it into the
Did you
bread.
bake it? Will it take on your bread?
Yeah, you look like you should throw. Is it just small? It's just hamburger bread. It's hamburger bread. I want bread. Can you please bread? You can eat enough.
Do you want a piece of bread as well?
That's overrated way too much.
Yes, you want?
She overdid it by far. No, by playing, have bread, and letting Isabella
I told you we should have come up with a dessert, but you guys said no.
And now the first thing we do without the oppressive queen in power is the Romantic Period. And we're going to be presenting it in the past tense to make it more dynamic and add depth. And in the background, playing Tchaikovsky's Dance with the Soldiers from the Nutcracker. Dance with the Toy Soldiers from the Nutcracker.
Turn on the music just a bit, please. The French Revolution. So, King Louis XVI of France came into power in 1774 when his father, King Louis XV, died. So the new king, he was young, like he wasn't even really like 20 years old yet, and he was really indecisive. He couldn't make decisions. He was kind of fat too. No joke. He inherited a country with many problems, and he just made it worse. Like they had wars with England, so they were kind of in debt. And also he gave money to the Americans so they could fight the British to get revenge. So it was good for the Americans, but bad for France. They didn't have any money there. King Louis XVI married Marie Antoinette when they were just 14 and 15 years old. And Marie Antoinette was Austrian, so like that's how they did it back then. If you were gonna be friends with the country, married their person. King Louis was a very incompetent manager of his country and continued to just make his country run into despair. So the royals and nobles had this. This is the palace at Versailles.
La galerie des
outside of
glaces.
France. Wow. So yeah. And then the common people had this. Go back one again. No.
Yeah.
This. This. Bread was the poor and common people. Like struggle for bread and everything. It's hard for them.
Oh gosh.
It's not funny. Yeah. Go back to it one more time. Is this funny?
Go on.
For a while, people had been meeting to discuss new ideas, like the ideas of enlightenment. Because at this time, people were just realizing that they could like choose what they wanted to happen for them without being ordered to by the church and king. So that was a new way of thinking. Like, I can change what's going to happen in my future without being told to. So these people would eventually lead the revolutionary government. And the representatives of the people, so like you had representatives, the royals and the church in the parliament, but the royals and the church would always just outvote the representatives and they wouldn't really do anything. So yeah, they'd always get outvoted. So the representatives decided to make a new document, making them the real government. And then so they were happy. And violent revolts broke out in Paris, and they charged the king's palace in Versailles, and they forced the king and queen to move to Paris and reduce their power.
Liberté, égalité,
An
fraternité.
enlightened thinker and leader in the revolutionary government, Maximilien Robespierre wrote The Rights of Man. This was a document for citizens having their basic rights. In this document, liberty and equality were seen as rights for all citizens. The third part of the motto, brotherhood, was harder to put in, but we can find its roots in a speech on the army by the club of the Cordeliers. In this speech, the motto, liberté, égalité,
You want to say it?
yeah,
Liberté, égalité, fraternité was said.
was said. But the thing, go back, and something happened here, like, after the revolution, the new revolutionary government was bad too. Like this guy, he sent a lot of people to the guillotine and chopped off their heads. Louis talked about it, the terror, and then the Great Terror. But, I mean, some good things came out of the revolution, like freedom and rights.
The human rights is not the roast beef rights first?
It's not your presentation.
Only ask.
The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution refers to the time between 18th and 19th century when advances in technology led to changes in the way things were done. Factories, more production, cotton spinning, new inventions made more production possible, such as steam power and cotton spinning, textile production. More people moved into cities to find work from farms, and they found work in factories, although their pay was not always the best.
The arts. Romantic arts and literature. Artists in the Romantic era focused more on exotic art and art with patriotic emotions. Also, a higher interest in nature and supernaturalism emerged. Artists use nature to express emotions. The supernatural side was shown by displaying different aspects of supernaturalism. Cupid represented love and demons represented fight and war and hate. Artists such as Joseph Mallard William Turner expressed themselves using color and shading. He used color to represent feelings. He said that in his work, red and yellow expressed excitement, white, while blue evoked more of a cold sensation. His work was also influenced by scientific developments occurring in the Romantic period. And this, shows how color was used in that picture. Delacroix, who was also a famous painter at the time, used wild animals and stayed away from the traditional subjects used in art. The picture on the right is called The Lion Hunt, and it's by Delacroix. Heroes are also represented. And if you see, it's kind of like a war setting. The picture on the right displays a common man reading hero. The emergence of Bohemianism. Bohemianism refers to a particular way of life which usually has to do with literature, art, and music. Bohemianism was first noticed in the Romantic period, and they believed different things from the normal person who wasn't Bohemian. They're known for accepting poverty and being frugal instead of being like everyone else, and many novels and books were written about Bohemian living so that people don't see it as a bad thing, which people sometimes did. And a lot of people, a lot of people wrote novels, and some famous ones were Vanity Fair and Trilogy. And Bohemian artists were fresh and new in their ideas. William Pygmalion Thackeray mocked the rich, and he worked mainly in satires. The sense of individuality that came with Bohemianism had also led to the common stereotype of Bohemian artists. Artists were no longer tied to the patronage system, so they could be individuals, but a downside to that was that they were seen as outcasts and not normal. The Bohemian artist was seen as the rejected dreamer who, through peculiarities of dress and behavior, shot the bourgeois. How does this pronounce that? Okay, poetry in the Romantic era. In the Romantic era, William Lyle Bowles created a set of sonnets, and they gained lots of popularity, and those set the path for witty, spontaneous poems to be created instead of a more heavy underlying theme. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor, two influential poets of the Romantic era, stated what they believed poetry should be like. And they said, poetry should express in genuine language experience as filtered through personal emotion and imagination. The truest experience was to be found in nature. Poets wrote about exotic things and supernatural events, but they could also appreciate common things which weren't as exotic. Gothic romances were also emerging in the Romantic period, and Frankenstein was written in the Romantic era.
Hey, I wrote a poem. Does anybody want to hear it?
Yeah!
Yeah.
Get on my
Great audience.
As it appeared to enthusiasts at its commencement, oh, pleasant exercise of hope and joy, for mighty were the auxiliaries which then stood upon our side, we who were strong in love. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Oh, times in which the meager, stale, forbidden ways of custom, law, and statute took at once the attraction of a country in romance, when reason seemed the most assert her rights, when most intent on making of herself a prime enchantress to assist the work, which then was going forward in her name. Not favored spots alone, but the whole earth, the beauty war of promise, that which sets as at some moment might not be unfelt among the bowers of paradise itself. The budding rose above the rose full blown, what temper at the prospect did not wake, the happiness of thought of, the inert were aroused, and lively natures rapt away. They who had fed their childhood upon dreams, they playfellows of fancy, who had made all powers of swiftness, subtlety, and strength, their ministers, who in lordly wise had stirred among the grandest objects of the sense, and dealt with whatsoever they found there, as if had within some lurking right to wield it. They too, who of gentle mood had watched all gentle motions, and to these had fitted their own thoughts, schemers more mild and in the region of their peaceful selves. Now was it that both found the meek and lofty did both find, helpers to their heart's desire, and stuff at hand, plastic as they could which, were called upon to exercise their skill. Not in utopia, subterranean fields, or some secreted island, heaven knows where, but in the very world, which is the world of all of us, the place where in the end we find our happiness, or not at all.
And back to romantic literature. Literature in the romantic period comprised of lots of themes, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who's right here, expressed how much he loved nature and that he said humankind was only pure before society existed. Another famous writer was Victor Hugo, and he believed that man was not just placed on earth with a task to do and a path to follow, but he believed that human beings were individuals and that they should do whatever they want. And he was the author of The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Miserables. Alphonse de Lamartine was another well-known poet and author, and he also focused on emotion and sentimentality. And he wrote history books sometimes, but they lost credibility because he was so sentimental. Lord Byron was also influential in the Romantic period, and he wrote satires, but some of them were more deep and less funny than his others. And he was versatile. Many people didn't appreciate how bluntly honest he was, but he still continued, and he didn't really care what they thought. John Keats was another romantic poet who expressed his feelings in paradoxes, where he would express one theme but then contradict that theme completely by adding the opposite. Authors who explored deep themes and exotic locations. Emily Bronte was another well-known romantic writer. You might know her for writing Wuthering Heights, and she explored deep themes in her novels as well, such as love, religion, vengeance, and prejudice due to class. Victor Hugo, as I said before, also expressed human conflicts, and he didn't like conformity, and he thought that was affecting people. And Leo Tolstoy wrote Anna Karenina and War and Peace, and War and Peace was set in the Napoleon Wars in the French Revolution, and some deep themes were hypocrisy and insubstantiality of war and aristocracy. Alexandre Dumas was the author behind the novels The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo was set in a remote place, the island of Monte Cristo, which was based on his travels to Monte Carlo. Strangeness and Wonder. Kubla Khan by Coleridge is a poem that has topics of high interest level. He speaks of a paradise which is threatened by demons and is bound to be destroyed. Nathaniel Hawthorne is famous for The Scarlet Letter, which is about a woman who had a child with a man who was not her husband, and she got shamed for it for as long as she lived. And at that time, it got many readers to think, and they usually didn't think about that thing. And The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe also urged people to think, for there were lots of symbols hidden in the poem that meant something else. However, it wasn't just the symbols in the poem that made it strange, but the fact that the man is realizing things about his life through a bird. Yeah. Romanticism and music.
The Industrial Revolution spurred
Oh, is that Janice?
Okay. Oh, I can read it for you.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, this is probably, is it yours? The Industrial Revolution spurred technical advances for instruments. Many different instruments were being used in people's homes, sometimes even the guitar, harp, concertina, and banjo. The most important instrument at this time was the piano because it sounded good as a solo as well as in a group. Pianos were so important that smaller versions were created just to fit into people's homes. The Industrial Revolution advanced many instruments for convenience to people, which led to a lot of people buying instruments and a lot more music manufacturing. Romantic music styles. Unlike the classical era, the Romantic era allowed artists to paint and compose freely with creativity. The main feature of the music was the melody. The artists composed with folk song melodies to express their cultural identity. A new piece of work from the Romantic era was a symphonic poem. This was an orchestral piece that told a story with a literary background. The musician in society. During this time, the musicians changed in style. They became more natural but exotic. Although pieces like sonatas were still used by the Romantic era composers, the new, bigger set-up audience didn't appreciate the details of the development of themes as much as to be swept along on waves of melody, harmony, and rhythm. Women in the Romantic era. The Romantic era was a time of emotion and creativity. Romanticism came from Western Europe in the 18th century and became strong in the Industrial Revolution. The Romantic era then brought a lot of women to write poems, novels, music pieces, and other literary works. There are plenty of women who gained respect in the Romantic era. Romanticism brought out the emotion in people, and the women expressed that through writing and song. The Lied. The Lied is a particular type of song from Germany sung by Minnesingers, which are people who sing about courtly love. The first Lieder was dated from the 12th and 13th century. Many Lieder found reflect Southern German traditions and are written in a group of manuscripts of later times. The songs are played in a number of forms by poetic models. The Lied proper is like many other forms. It is commonly made with two sections. The first phrase of music repeated with different words, and the second phrase also is repeated word. This two-section form is favored mostly by German composers. That's the Lied. Schubert and the Lied. Franz Schubert composed more than 600 Lieder. He did compose many other forms of music, but he did have an incredible talent for composing Lieder. Franz Schubert didn't live a long life after dying at age 31, but he did progress rapidly in his composition of Lieder. Robert Schumann. Robert Schumann was born on June 8, 1810, and was a famous composer from the Romantic period. At first he was studying law, but took an interest in music and dropped law school. Through his beginning years in music, he created pieces mainly for the piano only. Several years later, he opened up to different types of music and started composing Lieder in particular. His work ranged from small charming pieces like the Kindersingner to his large dramatic pieces like the symphonic etudes.
This is a Schumann Lied.
The piano and its literature. The piano comes from the harpsichord and the clavichord in about 1725. The piano has changed a huge amount from when it was first created in design and in sound. It still continues to change, but only to become better. The piano's literature is the sheet music you read while playing the piano. There are many different kinds of sheet music. Piano sheet music is called a piano score. Before the 15th century, sheet music was handwritten and saved in manuscripts. Even after people started to print sheet music, people preferred to write the sheet music even into the 18th century. Frédéric Chopin.
Chopin.
Chopin was born February 22nd, 1810. He was a Polish piano composer. At school, he got an education in music from Joseph Elsner, a musician and director at the School of Warsaw. Chopin's talent was expressed in his many piano pieces and is a well-known composer of the Romantic period. His individuality was emphasized in his pieces because they sounded different to other musicians' pieces.
This is a Chopin piece.
Louis Murat Gottschalk. Gottschalk was born in New Orleans in 1829. He grew up in a neighborhood where he was around Creole music with its Caribbean and African rhythms and folk songs. Growing up with this music inspired him to make his pieces sound a little bit like them. His first career was as a pianist in Europe. He later moved back to America, and by the 1860s he became famous for his piano work there. He died December 18, 1869 in Brazil, a day after he collapsed while performing a concert.
The nature of program music. Program music is not like regular music. It's more like telling a story with clear detail, facts about people, a place, or an event. Program music was first invented by a composer named Franz Liszt.
Okay, this is Berlioz and the Program Symphony. Also, it's also the Symphony Fantastique. So, Hector Berlioz was a French composer of the Romantic period. He was born December 11, 1803. He was well known for putting together large orchestras and has performed concerts with more than 1,000 musicians. He also composed about 50 pieces ranging in form. In the early 1830s, he found it difficult to become well known for his music in France, so he started to travel to different countries performing his pieces. In 1847, on a visit to London, he was asked to be the conductor at the Drury Lane Theatre. On March 8, 1869, he died in Paris with his family and his initially composed in 1830, his first performed in December that same year. His Symphonie Fantastique was conducted by Habeneck. However, during his trip to Italy, Berlioz revised the work in 1831 and 1832, but did not publish it until 1845. The symphony's original composer is unknown, but Berlioz's name is always the closest to the symphony. He contributed to the growth of the modern orchestra. He did this by creating a more advanced set of seating in the orchestra and adding more musicians and instruments. The Symphonie Fantastique has 5 different parts here, and it's the movement. It's 5 different movements. The opening song with a slow introduction builds up the piece and lets audience hear the first full statements of the theme at the start of the allegro. Bar 71 follows. The allegro is in sonata form. After a series of long, hard developments, the end of the movement finished retrospectively to the introduction. Second movement. The second movement begins with a waltz and has a great contrast with the first movement. The use of the harp is in the second movement, and giving this part more of a feel of the type of music. Yep. Next one. Third movement. The third movement is the middle, or here, of the symphony. It is the most dramatic and intense part of the entire symphony. Berlioz uses 3 different elements that are blended together throughout the whole movement. Towards the end of the movement, the intensity gets lesser and lesser. The fourth movement. This movement originally came from the March of Guards, which is another operating name. The fifth movement. The fifth movement is the most provocative and fits with the whole symphony. Unlike any other symphony written, it has a mixture of speech, drama, melodrama, and orchestral music. It is also the movement with the freest flow. That's the last one.
Musical nationalism, or nearing the end if you guys can remember that break. Nationalistic music. In the 19th century, nationality was embraced as part of life rather than a fact of life. Music in the Romantic era reflected how composers felt, and so since they felt as though they were part of the country, their music reflected this as well. Thus, nationalistic music. Additionally, since nationalism refers to a person's feeling of duty towards their country and not their government, and since Europe was in political chaos due to bad governments and struggles for power, nationalism in music grew. National events, places, and heroes were celebrated in this music, celebrating the country rather than the government. National music schools. National music schools in Italy, France, Germany, England, Bohemia, and other European countries were founded. These schools set out to separate themselves from classical traditionalists. Different types of music were studied at these schools, but usually music study had roots in country schools continuing with the theme of nationalism. Nationalistic compositions. So there were many nationalistic pieces and in the 19th century, the Romantic era, and so these are more the famous ones. So Bedřich Smetana from Bohemia wrote his piece, My Country. Then Anton Dvorak from Bohemia wrote From the New World after a visit to the US, or to America at that point. And then Tchaikovsky from Russia wrote the 1812 Overture, which is what you're listening to now. Edvard Grieg from Norway wrote Peer Gynt, and Charles Sibelius from Finland wrote Finlandia. Okay, so his name is self-explanatory. And now, sit.
Oh, right. Now, me and Isabella are going to play a
So.
piece. Hey, Isabella.
Yes,
I just wrote this piece.
Oh, really? Let me hear it.
It goes a little bit like this. I'm not gonna play the whole thing because I don't have much time.
Okay.
But I'm just gonna play the beginning part.
Okay.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm listening. Say it.
Okay. Sorry. What do you think? How does that sound?
I think it sounded cool, Sam, but you know, I think it'd be better if it was in a different key and if you played it with more feeling. 'Cause,
Why?
you know,
Why? Since when is music played with feeling?
we're in the Romantic era, Saya. Haven't you heard?
Oh, right. Music's supposed to be played with feeling. Why don't you play something with feeling and show me?
I'll play it, but you know, if I make mistakes, don't listen to them because you know, it's my friend. I'm trying to transpose your piece here.
Okay. Wow, that sounded much different. Maybe if next time I stopped paying attention to guessing everything right, and maybe if next time I played it more emotion, it would sound better.
That's a good idea, Saya.